All right, here we're going to look at creating some interesting weather effects, I guess we could say, in After Effects 2022. And these are some common ones, but it's how we also interact them with something underlying, like a different background or something like that. So we're going to play around a little bit here. So let's just try this out. So I'm going to create a new composition, normal 1920, 1080, 24 frames per second, 20 seconds, doesn't really matter. We're just playing around here. And, you know, I'll call this, I guess we can call it weather, but there are some of these that are not weather. But always good to name your comps. Okay, so there's my weather composition, 1920, 1080, and what I'm going to play with are just some basic ones. But we do have to start off with something. We know that if we start off our composition, realistically, there is no white background here. It's actually a transparency, but After Effects adds a white background first. What we will do is add our own background layer, new, solid, and I'm just going to make a black background. That's it. It's just so I have an actual black background. There I go. Great. Now I'm going to make another layer. So what I want to do is I actually want to apply this effect to a layer. So let's just do that. So I'm going to go to layer, new, and I'm going to make another solid layer. Now it does matter what you color these. So even in the meantime, I'm just going to make this gray, just so a 50% gray roughly, so I can see what's happening, what's not happening. I can always change this later, which I'm going to show you how to do. You can name it up here properly. So even for now, I'm just going to say, okay, and we can name it layer as well here in the layer panel. So let's start with some snow. So we'll go to snow, we're going to go to our effects and type in snow. So here the one that we want, it comes up, it's simulation CC snowfall. Let's just click that, drag it over, or I could have just double clicked it and it would have attached it to this layer. And now I'm just going to scroll this down, and I'm not really going to play with it here on my twirl snowfall here because all the effects are up here as well. And there's really no timing because what happens with this is that it's just automatically happening. So right now it's kind of tough to see, it's like we can't see anything, right? So let's play around with our panel here and see what starts to happen and kind of enjoy a little bit of this snowfall here. So first, let's look at our flakes. Well, can't really see much flakes, even if I bring them up. Well, okay, now I start to see a little bit of something happening here. Okay, so you know what I'm gonna do? I'm going to go back to my gray solid, and I'm going to go up to layer in solid settings, and let's change the color and see if we can see something a little bit better if we go a little bit darker. Okay, so that helps out, and now I can see them a little bit better. I'm not going to go full black, but what I will is I can play around with this later. I'm just going to say okay. So now I start to see what it kind of looked like. It's a little tough to tell, but there it is. And I press the space bar, the RAM preview, so I could play it and kind of see what's happening. That's like an automatic thing that happens right away. So what I'm going to do, I'm like, let's play around with this a little bit more. And I'm just going to have it keep playing. And as I let it play, it's going to keep changing here so you can get a better sense of what's going on. Let me bring this down a little bit so I could see more of my screen here, my composition. There we go. Okay, there we are. So now I'm just going to play around. I'm going to let it play again. Press the space bar. So the flakes. So what can I do with these flakes? So I'm just playing around here and seeing what the difference is on how many flakes I have. So this just shows me that. And once again, a lot of these can be animated. So I could have very few flakes and then bring it up to a lot of flakes. So let's keep it there for now. Let's play around with the size. Okay, let's see what all the sizes could be, very small or really big. Okay, variation of size. Okay, let's see what that does. Well, now we're going to have some really small ones and some really big ones, or they could all be consistent and uniform. So let's make some variation there. Scene depth. So kind of what is close and what is far. So we can have something that looks really close to us and some that look really far. So that kind of plays around with the opacity a little bit. It plays around with the size as well. So let's keep that and make it seem like we have a lot of depth here. Some really ones that are close up and ones that are further away. Speed. Well, that's how fast these are falling. So let's see if they fall really, really fast. And that's as fast as we go. Now it doesn't have to go that fast. I want to keep it somewhat simple as I play around here. Variation of the speed. So some will fall fast, some will fall slow, or they can be all consistent. So right here, they're all falling at the same speed. Here, they all fall at different speeds. Some go fast, some go slow. Wind. So I can bring in some wind here. So if I bring in some wind, let's see what that does. What it will do, it'll start moving some of them in a certain direction. Now, the one thing I noticed is that there isn't a, oh, sorry, I changed it accidentally. I noticed that there isn't an an actual rotation. I could say I want them to fall this way or I want them to fall that way. But what it does offer me here in wind, it gives me a 0% or a 0 right here, more or less. I could type in, and that's just flat. But if I bring it to the right, well, potentially things will start moving this way. Or if I bring it to the left, not really seeing a huge difference. I actually thought it would have given me more of where it would be falling, which angle it would be falling at. Either way, we're just playing around here. Variation of the wind. So maybe the wind is changing up a little bit. Okay, so let's bring up that speed and see what that does with the wind as well. Let's bring this all the way over here. Okay. So we see there's some interaction there. Well, let's look at the spread. So let's see what the spread does. If I bring it all the way down, if I bring it all the way up. So now we start to see a little bit more with that wind, how it's interacting. We see a lot of different directions happening. And if I bring my spread down, I see it all very much consistent again. So let's bring it up a little bit and see what happens there. Wiggle. Now I played with wiggle before, and I'm noticing not too much change. In some of these, you'll start seeing they fly around a little bit more, but it depends on how much you want. So there can be a significant amount of change depending on how much you put there, but really they could just go straight down, or they could actually start moving around a little bit more. So that's what wiggle does for us. And now let's look at the frequency. Let's change that up a little bit and see what else that does. So it does it even more. Variation of the frequency. So there's plenty of things we could do here. How about color? Let's change the color up. Let's just play around with something still light. And once again, the interaction of that gray background I still have. Well, we might even say, you know what, I don't just want a flat background, I want to maybe interact with an actual picture. So I'm going to bring in a picture in just a little bit, just so you can see how that works. So right now I'm just going to leave it at that. Say okay. The opacity, okay, yeah, I don't want it to show up that much. I want it to show up a little bit, just a little bit, or I want it to be very, very present. Background illumination, so we can kind of play around with the influence that the background has, depending on the kind of background we have. So this we can go, a lot, very luminant, but that's all right. Spread width, let's see what that does. But I think this will work a little bit more when I actually bring in an actual background. Right now we just have that flat background playing around there. Transform extras, let's look at, we could play around with the offset. Now the offset really, and once again, you could animate it where it just moves from one side to another on the x-axis, or up and down with the y-axis, but you can't really tell. Well, you can really tell when we move it like that. Actually, let me stop it and let me do it that way. So now you can see how it kind of, the y-axis is used, and the x-axis can also move over too, which is pretty cool. Ground level. So let's see what the ground level does. So I can actually bring it up and say, yeah, there's going to be some ground here, so it only interacts with this. I couldn't feather it out, unfortunately, but I'm sure there's a way to do that anyways. So I'm just going to bring all that back. Actually, let's bring it down just a little bit. Oh, I guess we can feather a little bit there. That's actually very interesting. And I assume if I play with the Y, no, it stays the same, which is good. Embed depth. Okay, this is what that does. How much of that is seen. And random see down, and you can play around with it. I'm not even too sure exactly what that does. I'm gonna leave it alone. Either way, this is what we have right now. I'm gonna press pause again, or press the space bar again so we can play it. I'm gonna bring back my ground level to 100%, so it just plays through the whole screen. So this is what's going on, and that's fine. Now, if I were to change the color of my black solid, let's just try it. So I'm going to change up the color of my background. Let me actually call it background, so we know what that is. I'm going to change that to a different color. Now, this may not actually do anything because currently the gray background of this layer is also interacting with it. So nothing happening there. Let's cancel that. Okay, let's change up the solid layer background here. So layer, the actual layer that the effect is on, solid setting. So let's change up that background. Let's change it to black. Okay, so we can now see how the background is actually being affected on this layer, where the effect is actually played. And you can play around with something interesting there, which is fine. Right now, let's keep it black. Okay, great. Say okay and okay. Now what we can do is we can play around with how it interacts with a picture. Let's bring a picture in and see what happens. So I'm going to bring this picture in of this forest that I had. I'm going to go to my project panel here, which is still there. It just got hidden because my effect controls came over top of it. And I'm going to bring in this. There we go. So there's my picture. And I am going to just drop it underneath and see what happens here. So nothing happening. Well, that's okay, because what we could do now, we can use our blending modes. Now, if you don't have modes on, you can right click on that top layer, click on columns, and then you're going to click on modes, and you'll see your blending mode, and you see your track map. We don't need track map, obviously, but we're just going to play with our mode. All right, let's see what this does. I'm going to shut off my background, because now I have this picture here, and if I look at the picture, let me shut this off and shut this off. I see my picture there. Let me scale it down a little bit with my move tool. Okay, just bring it right about there. Great. Zoom in a little. And now let's see this interaction. You do need to zoom in on some of these, because what's going to happen is you actually have it going and moving, which is our normal speed and everything that we did, but now it's going to interact a little bit differently once we play around with our blending mode. So let's take a look. So normal. Now the way I like to shuffle through these and kind of go through all of them is I press shift and plus or minus. Now right now I'm on normal. So if I press shift plus, it's going to go to the next one. Dissolve, and it's going to go down. If I do shift minus, it's going to go back up to the one prior. So shift plus will get us and bring us through some of these. And now it's going to start interacting with the background with some of the blending modes. So we can do something pretty interesting. You can create some interesting effects here with how the blending modes work. And it can overlay properly how you want it to. Once again, I can go back, change up the actual color, anything that I changed before. I can still go back and re-edit those anytime I want. So let's even do that right now. So I'm just going to go back here. I'm going to go back to my black solid here that I had. I'm going to, you know what, this is going to be called snow, so let's name it properly. And I'm going to go back to my effect and effect controls, and let's change the color back to white. All right, just to show that we can change this anytime we want. And there we go. And I'm going to go back and play around with my, as long as the layer is selected, shift plus, and I can start playing around with how these work. And here we're using our stencil Luma and our silhouettes and how they interact. So some pretty interesting effects that we could play with here and how they work. Okay, so there we go. So now that's playing with Snowfall. So that's kind of an interesting way we could do that and play around with that. Now let's take a look and see. Actually, I did want to play with this background influence and the illumination there and what this did. Okay, so I'm just bringing out that illumination of the actual snow a little bit more, and the opacity of it more or less, and how it interacts with this background we have here. All right, and now we transfer mode. Let's take a look at this. Composite with original. So let's see what happens here. So I'm going to kind of bring these ones up a little bit just so we get a little less confused here, but there's so many things to look at. Okay. And now I just want to focus on this background part and this transfer mode. So it gives me composite. Let's see what composite does. Okay, now nothing changes there. I'm sure there's a reason for it. I'm going to go back to lighting, but composite with original. So I'm just going to shut that off. And now this, I'm going to bring this back to normal. So my blending mode is now back to normal, and I was actually able to have the snowfall interact with the background without actually changing my blending mode. So this is how you would just overlay the snowfall with without changing the blending mode. So just click off of composite with original, and now you have that interaction. Now it did go gray, so we could play around with that a little bit more, but this is how it is interacting there. So let's play around with this a little bit more. All right. And once again, we could play with a lot of different things here. But this is how the snowfall works, and this is how it interacts. Let's try another one here. I'm going to shut off snow. I'm going to keep my black background still. I'm going to keep my, let's just say forest image. Forest. There we go. Now let's try another one. Now in order to do this, once again, I'm going to add in another layer, new, solid. Let's make it black again. Sure, 1920, 1080, exactly what it was before. This time I'm going to do some bubbles, but the actual name for this and how we play it is called foam, because there's a lot of different things we could do with foam. So I'm just going to have this selected. I'm just going to double click it this time. I'm not going to drag it on, and there are my bubbles, and it looks kind of weird, but that's okay. So I'm just actually going to shut off my layer, my picture layer for now, just bring back my black background. So we saw that yes, there was a black background on here on the actual layer I made, but it kind of disappeared. It wasn't there. The bubbles just showed through. Now the bubbles look a little odd. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. That's because as soon as you open up your bubbles, or your foam, I should say, your view is kind of on draft. So you could do rendered, and now you're going to actually see the bubbles properly. So let's zoom in, but let's see that the full composition there. Okay, so there we are. I'm going to press pause again, spacebar, so we could see and play it actually in real time. So, but the thing is that happens here, the thing with the snowfall, when it comes back to start, it just loops. The snow just keeps going. When the bubbles start from back to the beginning, they start over again. There's no bubbles, and then they start appearing again. So there is that to keep in mind when you are playing with it, on how you want your bubbles to appear or stay or just kind of be continuous. So what I will do, I'm going to pick a part here where the bubbles are just consistent, and I'm just going to bring this in. So the playhead will only go from here to here and just loop, loop, loop. And let's see how that works. So now it'll just go through and go through, and it's just going to keep looping. It's not going to start over again here. So I'm going to go to my producer. My producer has a lot of options here, so let's see what they do. So I can play with my X and Y. Mainly, I can move these wherever I want. I can move the start point of this anchor point anywhere I want. So let's bring it over here. And that's where it starts there. If I click on here, I say I want to bring it over here, that's where it starts. Or I could just move my Y or my X. Let's move my X over. And now it's going to start over there. So now my X is my anchor points over here. So I can actually start it from different points. Okay, great. Producer X size. Let's see what that does. All right, so it just produces more on that X and the Y. Let's see what else this does. So, okay, what it does is it'll give me more of a horizontal if I play with my Y, and it'll play more with my vertical if I keep it on the X, or vice versa, I should say. My apologies. The X. Let's bring it back. Actually, to give us a better understanding of that. So I'm going to leave these both over here, and my producer for my X, I'm going to bring up. And it really fills out that entire space. But you know what? I'm going to bring this back to the beginning to give me a better understanding of that. Okay, let's do that. So now I see it start from there. So we see how it kind of goes around this horizontal line. Now let's bring that back. And now let's bring up the Y. And now we see how it goes on the vertical line, the Y, how it spreads out along the Y. So that helps us see it a little bit better by using the beginning part there. So let's actually use that. Now the producer orientation, let's see what that does. So it creates a slightly different angle on how they appear. So that's kind of interesting too. So we could use that. Production rate. All right, let's see what this does. Well, we figured out what that does. It just makes a lot of bubbles. How many do we want? We have a lot there. Okay. Bubbles. Now let's see. Now the individual bubble, the different sizes. Do I want them huge or I want them smaller? Whatever works. The variances. So the size. Do I want a lot of big ones, a lot of small ones, all different kinds of sizes, or do I want them all to be the same size near the end of their lifespan or near when they're fully grown? Lifespan. So that means how quick do they stick around, or do they pop really quickly? Or do they stay around a long, long time and don't actually pop? They just stick around and don't go anywhere. Okay, so let's say they pop, pretty close. Bubble growth speed, so how quickly do they grow? Or do they grow very slowly? The strength of them. I'm not even too sure exactly what that one does, but we could kind of play around and see what that does there. The physics. All right, the initial speed, initial direction, wind speed, wind direction, turbulences, wobbles, amount. So many different things to play with here. I'm not really going to play around with this too much. Stickiness. This could be interesting. How close they are and how close they stick together to each other, and they kind of have a little bit of that wobble there. We can play with wind direction and see what that does. So it blows them kind of in a different way. The wind speed, we can increase the wind speed so they really separate very quickly. And obviously pushing this way, which I changed that wind direction to. So I want to bring it back over here. I can make them blow this way, which is kind of interesting too. The zoom. So let's see what zoom does. Well, it just zooms into the bubbles so you can make them even bigger. Let's zoom out. Okay, so there's a lot we can control there as well. Universe size. Let's see what this does. Once again, just playing around. Doesn't seem to do too much in our current situation, but if you had other parameters set up, this might actually do something in particular. Rendering. Okay, so let's look at this, the blend mode. A few different blend modes: transparent, solid, old on top, solid, new on top. So the new ones would appear on top, or no, the old ones appear on top. They stay on top. So that's kind of interesting how those would appear. A bubble texture, so you have a lot of different options here. So let's go through some of the way the bubbles actually appear. So these are the default bubbles: amber, water beads, spit, cartoon coffee, winter stream, soda water, orange soda. So you can see there's quite a few different interesting options here. They're just rendering out the bubbles a little bit different colors, different overlays, different fills, and there's a lot you could play with here. And I'm sure if you overlay a certain solid layer fill, the solid layer, and you change the color and did an overlay with your blending mode, I'm sure you could change up colors even more. So these are some of the common ones, the default ones I should say, that are given to us. So let's just play with our default. That's fine. The orientation. I'm not going to play around too many more of these. Reflection strength, reflection coverage, flow map. There's a lot going on here. But once again, if I want them to interact with my background, they already do automatically, which is pretty cool. Actually, let's change this up to spit because there's more of the white and that kind of shows up. And let's play around with more of the bubbles. And let's see, production rate. And we have them last a long time. And we can kind of move this over now so we could see what they do. And once again, if you wanted to fill up the screen, you'd play around with them a little bit more up here to really kind of open up the space and play around there. And that's it. So playing with the bubbles, pretty interesting way to kind of have some fun with those too. There's something specific you can play around with where you might need these, or just kind of have some fun creating an interesting effect. Okay, so that's bubbles. Let's click on that, and it's foam, but we also just made bubbles. And the last one I want to look at here is stars, the starburst. So let's click on star, and I see I have CC starburst. So let me stop the CTI from playing. It's still going. There we go. So I'm going to make, once again, a new layer again. This time I'm going to shut off my forest again. Make a new layer, new, solid. Once again, let's make it midway gray, just so if it's too black and something happens, or if it's too white, something happens, we can't see it exactly. Let's see what this does here. Because obviously different effects do different things, and if we're uncertain about what it's about to do, mid-gray will give us an idea of where I need to be to make that effect work properly. So here I am with, once again, I click on star, and I see my star burst. I'm going to click and drag and bring it onto my new solid. Well, there it is right there. Let's see what this does. I'm just going to play through. All right, it's coming at us. Some interesting star shapes. These look like just like circles coming at us, but here is a pretty cool rendering of what we could play around with. Now let's see what this does for us. If I play to the end, right now it's going to go up to here. If I start over, what happens? Okay, just loops. So it doesn't start from scratch like the bubbles did. It's just going to keep going, similar to the Snowfall. So let's look at a few. Now there are fewer options here, like the bubbles and the Snowfall. Far fewer options here, but once again, let's play around. Scatter was at 100%. Let's bring it down. Okay, so now we're getting this interesting part here where it does start almost from an interesting point where at the beginning, but it's just looping itself here, and that's what's going on. So if I brought my scatter all the way down, let's see what that does. Okay, we see what the point is there. So when it scatters all those individual pieces, all those circles, this is kind of what it looks like. Oh, let's look at the speed. Let's slow it down. Well, wait, what happened? We kind of going backwards now. So there is a midpoint here at 0 where it will do, I assume, nothing or move very, very slowly. But if I bring it up a little bit, it's going to start coming towards, almost on that Z axis, coming towards us. And the opposite, if I go minus, it's going to move away from us. So let's keep that going for a while. But I want to slow it down because it gets a little overwhelming. The phase, let's see what this does if I move this. Kind of have to figure that one out a little bit more of what the phase rotation actually does. Grid spacing, let's see what grid spacing does. Okay, kind of spaces them out a little bit more. Kind of the way we had that grid there if we didn't scatter them. I thought I would maybe play with that grid a little bit more, but the grid does break them up a little bit more if we bring it all the way up, that's for sure, yes. The size, okay, so we could have some really small ones, tiny ones, or some obviously really big ones, and we can use those in a certain way, and blend with original. So original means that background. So right now I have that black back, or that gray in my black background here. Well, let's bring the forest back in, and now let's see how it interacts there. So how do we blend this with the original? So I could do full out, no background of my gray solid. Let's call this properly. Let's call this our stars. Okay. And now we're seeing how it interacts. And now, once again, if I bring it up, I'm just bringing up more of the background of my stars, which happens to be that gray. So either way, I'm going to bring it all the way down, and now it interacts specifically just with my background. But once again, let's play around with our blending modes. Let's play around. Now, realistically, you know, it would be nice to have different options like this, the bubbles did, the foam did, where they break, and maybe different kinds of them. All those different options, but we don't, which is fine. So what I can do though is I could probably change up the layer, the solid settings of that gray, and change the color. So let's change the color to red. Okay, now they're red. All right, that's odd. Let's go a dark green, so it kind of interacts with my my forest image here. And let's just say, okay, so changing the color of the stars is changing the color of the solid settings. And this is where you do it. You have a solid already set up. So you set up your solid. Once it's up, you want to change the color, go to solid settings, and now you can change the color of that. So now we're just going to play around with the different blending options. So blending mode, so shift plus, and let's just see kind of what some of them do. And see if there's ones that work better for us. Obviously in this scene we're not looking for anything in particular, but we could see how some work better than others depending on what we're trying to create here. Okay, so this is how these particular weather ones work. There's so much play with these. Depending on what you're trying to do, you could put them inside of something. You know what, let's play around with a mask here. So I'm actually going to pause this for a second. I'm going to shut these off, keep that one on, and I'm going to create some text. So let's create some text here. So let's just say, you know, space. Cool. And we will just increase the size of this. Hold down shift, keep it proportional. Hold down command, double click the anchor. So the anchor is always in the middle. And I could just even use a line here to align a line. And let's bring back that black background. And now let's create a little mask here where this will appear inside of space. So these kind of all the little stars will appear inside of space. Well, how do we do that? We're going to make space the mask and stars underneath. So what I have to do is I'm going to add a track matte, and the space is going to become more or less the mask of stars. So let's add alpha matte, and now they're inside, and let's play it out. And that's kind of how that works. Kind of create this mask there. Well, you know what, it's kind of working, it's kind of not, so let's play around a little bit more, because maybe what I need to do is I need to bring that scatter down so I get more of them, and I can see the word space a little bit better. Maybe I could decrease the speed just to slow it down. There we go, see that a little bit better. Once again, I'm still interested in phase and exactly what that does, but I do see there is a rotation happening when I play with that. I see there's more spacing there, a little less there. Grid spacing, let's bring that down, see what that does. Okay, I see what that's actually pretty, oh, I kind of like the way that's happening there. That's pretty cool. The size, let's see what the size does. Okay, pretty cool. Blend with original. That original background that we had, which was the green. It changed, obviously, when we made the layer setting. So that's it. This is something we could do that's pretty interesting. Once again, creating something, an interesting animation, something happening with our foam or snow or stars, and then utilizing them in a different way for type or different objects, and kind of having some fun with that. So I hope that helps, you know, play around with effects a little bit more and see what else we could do with them.